Imagine, for a moment, that your most cherished memories, the very stories that form the bedrock of who you are not fixed recordings, pristine and unchangeable, but rather something far more fluid, like water constantly reshaping the riverbed. What if the vivid recollections of your childhood, the triumphs, the small heartbreaks, the faces of loved ones, are not simply retrieved from a mental archive, but are subtly, almost imperceptibly, reconstructed? Each time you bring them to mind, this idea, initially, feels almost sacrilegious, a challenge to the very essence of personal truth. For Dr. Aris Thorne, a neuroscientist whose life's work revolved around the intricate architecture of the brain, this unsettling thought began as a whisper, a faint echo in the quiet corridors of her otherwise meticulously ordered world. Dr. Aris Thorne moved with a quiet precision through the hushed laboratories of the Neurocognitive Institute, the subtle hum of diagnostic machinery a familiar lullaby in her ears. Her office, high above the bustling city, offered a panoramic view, yet her gaze was often fixed inward on the microscopic dance of neurons that held the key to her lifelong fascination: memory. For Aris, memory was the ultimate testament to human experience, a faithful chronicler of life. She held a profound, almost spiritual belief in its fidelity, a conviction deeply rooted in her own past. She could close her eyes and instantly transport herself back to a specific summer afternoon when she was 7 years old. The scent of sun-warmed pine needles, the gritty feel of coarse sand beneath her bare feet, the distant cry of gulls over the rugged coastline of her childhood home. She was crouched by a tide pool, her small hands carefully turning over a smooth grey stone, when she saw it, a perfect fossilized imprint of a fern frond, delicate and intricate, preserved for millennia. Her grandfather, a retired botanist with kind eyes and a booming laugh, had confirmed her discovery, explaining how ancient life had left its indelible mark. This moment, clear as polished glass, had ignited her passion for discovery, for understanding how the past leaves its imprint on the present. It was, to her, irrefutable proof that some memories, especially those imbued with strong emotion and significance, were etched deeply, permanently, into the fabric of the mind, like that fern in stone. Her research, therefore, centered on strengthening this perceived fidelity, on enhancing the brain's ability to recall these precious recordings with greater clarity and detail. In her lab, the Mnemosyne project, named after the Greek goddess of memory, explored novel techniques to bolster neural pathways, believing that improved access meant a more perfect retrieval of existing, stable memory traces. Her team worked with sophisticated electroencephalography, EEG systems, tracking brainwave patterns during memory encoding and retrieval, and designed intricate cognitive exercises aimed at reinforcing synaptic connections. They even experimented with mild, non-invasive transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, on specific cortical regions, all with the underlying assumption that memory was a stored file, and their job was simply to build better pathways to that file, or perhaps to polish the lens through which it was viewed. The idea that the file itself might be rewritten, or even subtly altered, during the act of viewing, was not just absent from her hypotheses. It was anathema to her fundamental understanding of self and consciousness. Yet, cracks, almost imperceptible at first, began to appear in this perfectly constructed edifice. The first hint arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, during a casual coffee break with Dr. Ben Carter, a colleague whose wit Aris generally appreciated. They were reminiscing about a neuroscience conference they had both attended in Berlin 5 years prior. a particularly memorable event where a renowned speaker had presented groundbreaking work on glial cell function. Aris recalled the exact moment of a critical debate. The speaker, Professor Schmidt, struggling to answer a challenging question posed by a young, ambitious postdoctoral researcher from Kyoto. Aris remembered the uncomfortable silence, the way Schmidt had cleared his throat, the specific, slightly condescending tone of the postdoc's follow-up. It was right after lunch, Aris mused, stirring her coffee. He stumbled for a good minute before admitting he hadn't considered the implications for astrocytic networks. Ben, however, furrowed his brow. Wait, Aris, I remember that question too, but it wasn't after lunch. It was the very first session on the second day, and I recall Schmidt answering it quite gracefully, even acknowledging the postdoc's insightful point, rather than struggling. He even gave the postdoc a nod of recognition. Aris paused, her spoon hovering over her mug. No, Ben, you're mistaken. I distinctly remember the afternoon light filtering through the high windows, warming the side of the lecture hall. And Schmidt definitely looked flustered. I remember thinking how uncharacteristic it was for him. She felt a flicker of annoyance. Her memory of the event was so vivid, so replete with sensory detail, that Ben's version seemed almost absurdly incorrect. She was sure. Her brain had recorded it. How could he be so wrong? Ben, ever the amiable one, simply shrugged. Well, perhaps my memory isn't as photographic as yours. Or maybe I'm just mixing up conferences. It happens. He laughed, dismissing it. Aris, too, brushed it aside, attributing it to Ben's notoriously scatterbrained nature. After all, her own recollection was crystal clear, a perfect snapshot. It was a minor discrepancy, barely worth considering, yet it left a faint, almost imperceptible prickle of unease, like a tiny splinter beneath the skin. Could two people experience the exact same event and recall it so differently, with such conviction? She wondered, before consciously pushing the thought away. The true unsettling echo, however, manifested not in a casual conversation, but within the sterile, controlled environment of her own laboratory. The preliminary phase of a new study, designed to assess the impact of mild cognitive load on short-term recall, had yielded results that, while initially dismissed, continued to gnaw at the edges of her scientific certainty. The experiment involved a series of human volunteers, each asked to observe a complex dynamic visual scene displayed on a large screen for precisely 60 seconds. The scene depicted a busy urban street corner, a red car turning left, a person in a blue coat walking a dog, a street vendor selling flowers from a green cart, a clock tower showing 3:15 p.m. After a brief distractor task, participants were asked to verbally recall as many details as possible. This was repeated 3 times over a single day, with a 30-minute interval between each recall session. The expectation was that recall might degrade slightly over time, or perhaps stabilize after the first attempt. What her junior researchers, a bright but somewhat inexperienced pair named Liam and Chloe, reported was not simple degradation. Instead, they observed subtle yet consistent alterations in the recall details. For instance, a participant might initially recall the red car, but in the second recall, describe it as burgundy, and in the third, as a dark brown. The person in the blue coat might become a person in a grey coat, or the dog might change from a terrier to a poodle. The street vendor's green cart might shift to a yellow one, or the flowers from roses to tulips. Even the time on the clock tower, a seemingly objective detail, sometimes drifted by 5 or 10 minutes across successive recollections. The participants, when questioned, were utterly convinced their latest memory was the correct one, often expressing surprise when shown their earlier transcripts. But it was definitely a dark brown car, one volunteer insisted, despite having stated red car just an hour before. Aris initially attributed these findings to a host of factors: participant fatigue, demand characteristics, or perhaps an error in the transcription of verbal responses. She instructed Liam and Chloe to recheck their protocols, to tighten their controls, to ensure absolute consistency. "Memory doesn't just change like that," she had stated with calm authority, her voice betraying not a hint of doubt. "It's far more likely to be an issue with data collection or subject compliance. People simply misremember, or they get tired. It's not a fundamental alteration of the stored trace." She spoke of statistical noise, of outliers, of the inherent messiness of human experimentation. The vast majority of details did remain consistent, she reminded herself, focusing on the stability rather than the unsettling shifts. Yet, as the data continued to trickle in, showing the same pattern of incremental, confident alterations, Aris found herself spending longer hours staring at the spreadsheets, her brow furrowed. The noise seemed to have a peculiar, almost intelligent quality to it. It wasn't random forgetting. It was a reimagining of specifics, a subtle reframing. She started to notice that the changes often made sense within the context of the scene, as if the brain was trying to make the memory more coherent or more typical, even if it meant sacrificing absolute accuracy. A red car becoming burgundy or dark brown felt like a subtle shift within a category, not a complete fabrication, yet it was a change nonetheless. One evening, alone in her office, the city lights twinkling outside like scattered stars, Aris replayed a recording of one participant's 3 recall sessions. The volunteer, an elderly woman with an exceptionally sharp mind, had initially described a small yappy dog. In the second recall, it was a fluffy white dog. By the third, it had become a poodle with a red collar. The woman's voice was unwavering in her conviction each time, her tone betraying no uncertainty. Aris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the late hour. This wasn't simple forgetting. This was something else. This was as if the memory itself, each time it was brought forth, was being subtly resculpted, its edges softened, its colors perhaps repainted. Was it truly possible that the act of recalling a memory wasn't like playing a recording, but more like telling a story, where each retelling, however slight, could introduce new details or subtly alter old ones? She tried to rationalize it again. Perhaps the act of verbalizing the memory itself was a form of encoding, inadvertently influencing subsequent retrievals. Perhaps the brain, seeking efficiency, was consolidating details in a slightly different way each time, integrating new, minimal information, or even just the act of choice of retrieval itself into the memory trace. But the explanation felt thin, a fragile bandage over a growing fissure in her understanding. The fossilized fern of her childhood memory, once so solid and comforting, now seemed to shimmer at the edges, its perfect imprint momentarily blurring. The idea that her own cherished childhood memory might not be the immutable truth she believed it to be was a deeply unsettling thought. It challenged not just her scientific paradigms, but the very narrative of her own life, the foundational stories that had shaped her identity. And if her memories were not perfect recordings, then what was she truly remembering? What did it mean for the very concept of personal history? The questions, once comfortably distant, were now insistent, echoing softly in the quiet of her mind, refusing to be dismissed. Have you ever found yourself drifting into the quiet corners of your mind, recalling a moment from long ago, perhaps a childhood afternoon bathed in sunlight, or a significant event that shaped your path? We often imagine these memories as perfect snapshots, stored away like treasured photographs, waiting to be retrieved exactly as they were captured, pristine and unaltered. This comforting image, this deeply held belief about our own past, is a cornerstone of our identity, providing a stable foundation for who we believe ourselves to be. But what if this intuitive understanding, this sense of an unchangeable personal history, isn't quite right? What if the very act of remembering doesn't simply retrieve a memory, but rather recreates it, subtly reshaping it each time? The subtle discrepancies that had begun to surface in the research of Dr. Aris Thorne, and even in her casual conversations, had settled into a persistent hum of disquiet in her mind. Her initial dismissal of these anomalies, attributing them to experimental error or mere human fallibility, had given way to a gnawing curiosity. It was a sensation akin to finding a single misplaced thread in a meticulously woven tapestry. Once noticed, it became impossible to ignore, threatening to unravel the entire design. The vivid, almost tactile memory of discovering her first fossil as a child, an experience that had ignited her lifelong passion for science and formed the bedrock of her belief in memory's fidelity, now felt subtly, unsettlingly challenged. The very foundation of her scientific work, centered on strengthening memory recall as if memories were static files merely needing better access, seemed to tremble beneath her. Driven by this profound unease, Aris decided to seek guidance from the one person whose insight she trusted above all others, Professor Lena Petrova, her former mentor and a formidable figure in the field of neuroscience, known for her pioneering work in memory reconsolidation. Lena's laboratory, located on a quieter wing of the university campus, always seemed to possess a different atmosphere than the bustling, brightly lit corridors of Aris's own institute. Here, the air was often filled with the faint, comforting scent of old books and brewing coffee, mingled with the subtle, sterile tang of scientific equipment. When Aris arrived, the late afternoon sun cast long golden streaks across the worn wooden floor of Lena's office, illuminating shelves overflowing with journals and models of neural pathways. Lena, with her silver hair pulled back neatly and her observant eyes framed by spectacles, greeted Aris with a warm, knowing smile that immediately put her at ease, yet also conveyed an unspoken understanding of the turmoil Aris was likely experiencing. Aris explained the unsettling observations from her lab, the systematic subtle alterations participants made to visual details across successive recalls, convinced each time that their latest version was the accurate one. She described the dissonance between her own vivid, sensory-rich memory of the conference event and Ben's distinctly different recollection. Lena listened patiently, occasionally nodding, her gaze thoughtful. When Aris finished, a silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant hum of laboratory ventilation. Aris, Lena began, her voice soft but firm. What you're encountering is not an error in your experiments, nor is it a sign of individual failings. It's the very nature of memory itself. You've been operating under a common yet fundamentally flawed assumption that memories are like perfect recordings, stored away on a hard drive, waiting to be played back without change. She paused, letting the implication sink in. But the brain doesn't work like a digital recorder. Our memories are not static files. Instead, they are dynamic, living entities, constantly being rebuilt. Lena then introduced Iris to the concept of jyoti, neural engrams. She explained that an engram is not a single isolated neuron or a specific chemical trace. Instead, it is a distributed network of interconnected neurons that become activated during the formation and recall of a memory. Imagine it less like a photograph stored in an album, Lena gestured, and more like a sprawling, intricate garden that you visit repeatedly. Each time you walk through it, you might notice new growth, or perhaps a path has been slightly altered, or a particular flower you remember vividly is no longer there, replaced by something else. The garden itself is real, but your experience of it and your internal map of it changes with each visit. Iris leaned forward, a mixture of fascination and skepticism clouding her face. But if it's not a fixed recording, then what exactly is retrieval? Retrieval, Lena clarified, is not a simple playback. It's an active process of feel reconstruction. When you try to remember something, your brain doesn't just pull up a complete file. Instead, it gathers fragments of information, sensory details, emotional states, contextual cues from various parts of the brain. It then stitches these fragments together, often filling in gaps based on your current knowledge, expectations, and even your mood. It's like assembling a jigsaw puzzle where some pieces are missing, and you instinctively create new ones that seem to fit based on the surrounding image and what you expect to see. This process, Lena elaborated, makes every act of remembering a creative, rather than purely reproductive endeavor. Could it be that our memories are less about what was and more about what our brains believe should have been, or what is convenient to remember in the present moment? Lena then delved into the core mechanism behind this fluidity. Memory reconsolidation. This is where the real vulnerability lies, she explained, her voice dropping slightly. When a memory is recalled, it temporarily enters a fragile, unstable state. Think of it like wet cement. Once the cement is dry, it's solid and fixed. But if you re-wet it, even for a short time, it becomes pliable again, susceptible to changes, before it re-hardens. A memory, once recalled, becomes temporarily re-wetted, open to modification before it is restored or reconsolidated. During this brief period of instability, which can last for minutes to hours, the memory is vulnerable to alteration. New information, emotional states, or even subtle suggestions can be integrated into the existing neural network, changing the memory's content. When the memory is reconsolidated, it is restored, but potentially in an altered form. This means that the memory you recall today about a childhood event is not necessarily the exact same memory you had yesterday or a decade ago. It has been subtly re-edited, rewritten, perhaps even enhanced or diminished by subsequent experiences and current perspectives. So every time we remember something, Iris mused aloud, her voice barely a whisper, we're not just accessing it, we're also subtly changing it. Precisely, Lena confirmed. It's a fundamental adaptive mechanism. Your brain isn't designed to be a perfect archive. It's designed to help you navigate the present and predict the future. Remembering isn't just about retrieving the past, it's about updating it in light of new information. This process allows us to integrate new learning and modify our responses, making us more flexible and adaptable. But it comes at a cost: the perfect fidelity of our past. The implications of this scientific revelation crashed over Iris like a cold wave. Her long-held understanding of memory, deeply intertwined with her personal experience and the vivid, unshakable fossil memory from her youth, was directly contradicted. She had always believed that memory was a fixed, albeit sometimes fallible, record. To learn that it was a constantly shifting landscape, vulnerable to change with each recollection, felt profoundly unsettling. Could her cherished memory of that fossil, so clear and foundational, have changed over the years? Could the colors of the rock, the exact angle of the sunlight, the precise words her father spoke, be different now than they were when she first formed the memory? The thought brought a strange, almost physical ache to her chest. It was as if the ground beneath her feet, which she had always considered solid, had suddenly become fluid. Aris spent the next few days immersed in Lena's recommended literature, devouring research papers on synaptic plasticity, protein synthesis inhibitors, and the neural circuits involved in memory modification. She read about experiments where a fear memory, once reactivated, could be attenuated or even erased by introducing certain pharmaceutical compounds during the reconsolidation window. She saw evidence from human studies where participants, unknowingly, incorporated misleading information into their recall of events they had witnessed, simply because the suggestion was made during a period of memory reactivation. The evidence was compelling, meticulously gathered, and increasingly undeniable. The initial resistance she felt, a subconscious clinging to the idea of a stable, immutable past, slowly began to give way to a profound sense of intellectual awe and a quiet, almost fearful, acceptance. It was a humbling experience for a scientist who had built her career on the premise of memory's enduring nature. She began to see her own research in a new light, understanding that strengthening recall might not mean making a memory more accurate, but perhaps making a reconstructed memory more accessible and vivid. As the days turned into weeks, Aris found herself re-evaluating not just her scientific assumptions, but her entire personal narrative. If her own childhood memory of the fossil, so vibrant and definitive, was chemically and structurally different now than it had been 10 years ago, constantly integrated with new experiences and knowledge, what did that mean for her identity, for the very story of her life? The notion that her past was not a fixed, unchangeable text, but rather a perpetually re-edited manuscript, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. It meant that who she was at any given moment was a dynamic product of her past, her present, and her brain's ongoing creative efforts to weave them together. This was a truth far more complex and far more fascinating than any stable recording could ever be. How much of what we hold dear, of what defines us, is truly immutable? And if our memories are always changing, how can we truly know our past, or even ourselves? The quiet hum of the laboratory's ventilation system had once been a comforting backdrop for Dr. Aris Thorne, a constant reminder of the pursuit of objective truth. Now, after her conversations with Professor Petrova, it seemed to whisper a different message, one of subtle, constant change, much like the nature of memory itself. The neat, ordered columns of data on her screens no longer felt quite so absolute. A profound shift had occurred within her, a quiet revolution that moved from intellectual apprehension to a deeper, more visceral understanding. She found herself watching the world differently, observing how stories were told, how recollections were shared, always with a new filter of skepticism, not born of cynicism, but of scientific curiosity. Her initial resistance to the idea of memory as a fluid, reconstructive process had been deeply personal, rooted in her own vivid childhood memory of discovering that fossil. Yet, the evidence Lena presented, combined with the unsettling anomalies in her own research, had been undeniable. The brain, it seemed, was not a mere archivist, but a storyteller, constantly editing, refining, and even improvising. The question that now burned brightest in Aris's mind was, how far did this creative license extend? Could entire episodes of a life be subtly, or even overtly, reshaped by forces we barely perceived? This new perspective led Aris to a peculiar and compelling case that had been circulating in the neuroscience community, a patient named Elias Vance. Elias was known for his remarkably detailed and emotionally rich childhood memories, recollections so vivid they often captivated anyone who listened. He was, by all accounts, a man who lived deeply within his past, his identity seemingly anchored to these clear, bright moments. Yet, there was a crucial, unsettling twist. Many of Elias's most cherished memories were demonstrably false. Aris first encountered Elias's file through an informal referral from a colleague at a different institute. The initial report described a man in his late 40s, articulate and personable, who genuinely believed in the absolute truth of his elaborate recollections. One particular memory stood out, recounted in painstaking detail. A summer afternoon when he was 6 years old, playing near a small, winding creek behind his grandmother's house. He described the dappled sunlight filtering through the willow trees, the specific scent of damp earth and wild mint, the cool, silken feel of the water as he waded in, and the thrilling moment he discovered a small, perfectly preserved bird's nest, still cradling 3 tiny speckled blue eggs, partially submerged in the water. He claimed he had carefully rescued the nest, taken it home, and watched the eggs hatch over the next few days, eventually releasing the fledgling birds. It was a memory imbued with wonder, a foundational tale of his early connection to nature. The problem? Elias's grandmother, still alive and sharp-minded, emphatically stated that there was no creek behind her house, nor had there ever been. The backyard bordered a dense forest, but the nearest water feature was a pond several miles away. Furthermore, family photos from that summer showed Elias playing in a well-maintained garden, not a wild, creekside landscape. The bird's nest story, while beautiful, was an impossibility given the factual constraints. Elias, however, held on to his memory with unwavering conviction, gently dismissing his grandmother's corrections as a consequence of her advanced age. How could a mind create such a vibrant, multi-sensory illusion and then cling to it so fiercely? This was precisely the kind of real-world scenario Aris needed to explore. Aris began a series of carefully structured sessions with Elias, not as a therapist, but as a researcher observing the intricate dance of memory retrieval. Her goal was to understand the architects behind these illusions. She observed how powerful emotions could profoundly reshape his recollections. In one session, Aris gently guided Elias to recall a less joyful but still significant childhood event, his first day of school. As Elias spoke, a palpable sense of anxiety filled the room. His voice grew softer, his posture became slightly hunched. Initially, he described the large, imposing building, the unfamiliar faces, the overwhelming noise. But as Aris continued to probe, asking about specific feelings, the memory began to subtly shift. He recalled a teacher being stern, almost harsh, a specific reprimand for a minor infraction that left him feeling utterly humiliated. Later, when Aris cross-referenced this with school records and interviews with family members, the harsh reprimand was entirely absent. The teacher, Ms. Henderson, was consistently described as exceptionally kind and patient. It seemed Elias's underlying anxiety about new social situations reactivated by the recall, had colored and amplified minor details, perhaps transforming a gentle correction into a vivid, emotionally charged humiliation. His current emotional state, in essence, had acted as a filter, distorting the past to align with a more anxious narrative. But what if the very act of recalling a cherished moment changes it forever? Not just through emotional lenses, but through more subtle, almost imperceptible influences. Aris noticed how subtle contextual cues also played a crucial role in Elias's memory construction. During one session, Aris strategically placed a small, antique wooden bird carving on her desk, a seemingly innocuous decorative item. She then asked Elias to describe another childhood summer memory. Without any direct mention of the carving, Elias began to describe a different summer, one where he spent hours in his grandfather's workshop, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and linseed oil, watching his grandfather carve small wooden animals. He recalled his grandfather meticulously crafting a tiny bird, its wings spread as if in flight, a detail he swore he had always remembered. Yet, when Aris later reviewed previous interviews and family anecdotes about his grandfather, there was no mention of him ever engaging in wood carving. His grandfather was a keen gardener, not a craftsman. The presence of the small wooden bird on Aris's desk, a mere visual cue, had seemingly triggered a creative association, prompting Elias's brain to construct a plausible, emotionally resonant memory around it. It wasn't a lie. It was the brain's attempt to make sense, to weave a coherent narrative, subtly incorporating new information into the fabric of the past. The most striking demonstrations of memory's malleability came from observing the impact of leading suggestions. Aris conducted a small, controlled experiment within their sessions. She showed Elias a series of photographs from his childhood, some genuine, some subtly doctored. In one instance, she presented a photo of his family at a local park. "Do you remember?" she asked casually. "That red balloon you were holding that day? The one that floated away just after this picture was taken." There was no red balloon in the original photo, nor any account of one. Elias paused, his brow furrowed in concentration. He closed his eyes, then opened them with a look of dawning recognition. "Yes," he exclaimed. "I remember that. It was a bright cherry red balloon. I was so upset when it slipped from my hand. My mother had to buy me an ice cream to cheer me up." He had not only remembered the balloon, but had embellished the memory with additional details. The specific color, his emotional reaction, his mother's comforting gesture, all in response to a simple, leading question. The suggestion had planted a seed, and his memory had cultivated it into a full-blown, vivid recollection. This phenomenon, Aris realized, had profound implications, extending far beyond Elias Vance's personal history. If memory could be so easily swayed, what did that mean for justice, or even our collective understanding of historical events? Eyewitness testimonies, long considered crucial evidence in legal proceedings, suddenly appeared alarmingly unreliable. Two individuals could genuinely witness the same event, yet their subsequent recollections might diverge significantly, not because one was lying, but because their emotional state, the questions they were asked by police, or even the general atmosphere of the interview, could subtly reshape their memory. A traumatic event might cause a witness to focus intensely on certain details while completely suppressing others, or even to invent plausible but inaccurate elements to fill in the blanks, all without conscious intent. The brain, in its effort to construct a coherent story, often prioritized narrative flow over absolute factual fidelity. Aris found herself reflecting on her own fossil memory again. Had the excitement of the discovery, the hushed awe of her father, the pride she felt, subtly amplified certain details, or perhaps omitted inconvenient ones? Was the fossil truly as large as she remembered? Or had her youthful imagination, fueled by emotion, expanded its scale over decades of recall? The thought was unsettling, yet also strangely liberating. It meant that her identity wasn't a static collection of perfectly preserved moments, but a living, breathing narrative, constantly being rewritten and reinterpreted by her present self. The brain, it turns out, is a master architect of illusion, not out of malice, but out of necessity. It doesn't store memories like video recordings, perfectly capturing every pixel and soundbite. Instead, it stores fragments, impressions, and emotional tags. When we recall a memory, the brain doesn't simply play it back. It reconstructs it, drawing upon these fragments, weaving them together, and filling in the gaps with plausible details, often influenced by our current mood, expectations, and any new information or suggestions we've encountered. This active reconstruction process is what makes memory so adaptable and useful for learning, allowing us to integrate new experiences and modify our understanding. But it also renders it inherently vulnerable to subtle alterations, making our personal histories, and indeed our shared histories, far more fluid than we often imagine. The past, in this sense, is not a destination we visit, but a landscape we continually redraw, sometimes with conscious effort, but often without even realizing it. Have you ever considered that the most vivid, cherished moments from your past, the ones that feel as solid and real as the ground beneath your feet, might not actually be fixed recordings? What if the very fabric of those memories, etched into the neural pathways of your brain, is subtly, continuously changing? It's a thought that can feel unsettling, a gentle ripple across the calm surface of what we believe to be our personal history. Imagine for a moment that your brain doesn't just store memories like files in a cabinet, untouched until retrieved. Instead, picture them as living, breathing narratives, constantly being retold and subtly revised, even at a fundamental biological level. This idea, initially a quiet whisper of doubt, began to grow into a profound realization for Dr. Iris Thorne. After her disquieting observations about Elias Vance and the reconstructive nature of memory, Aris found herself drawn deeper into the neurobiological underpinnings of this phenomenon. The psychological malleability of memory, influenced by emotion and suggestion, was one thing. But what about the physical brain itself? Could the very structures that encoded these experiences be in a state of constant flux? She spent countless hours in the quiet hum of her lab, the faint scent of ozone from the nearby equipment a constant companion, poring over dense scientific papers and peering at high-resolution images of neural networks. Her fingers traced the intricate diagrams, her mind wrestling with the implications. The traditional view, one she had largely subscribed to, was that once a memory was consolidated, firmly established in long-term storage, it became relatively stable, like writing an important message in indelible ink. But Professor Petrova's insights had opened a new door, revealing the dynamic process of reconsolidation. Iris now understood that every time a memory was recalled, it was temporarily destabilized, like a piece of pottery being taken off the kiln and becoming soft once more. During this vulnerable period, it could be updated, modified, or even overwritten before being restored. But how did this constant reconstruction manifest physically within the brain? What were the chemical and structural transformations that underpin this fluidity? The answer, Aris discovered, lay in the astonishing adaptability of the brain's fundamental building blocks, neurons and the connections between them, known as synapses. Memories, in essence, are patterns of activity within vast networks of these neurons. When we learn something new or recall an old memory, specific synapses strengthen or weaken, a process known as synaptic plasticity. Think of it like a well-trodden path in a forest. The more you walk it, the clearer and wider it becomes. But if you start taking a slightly different route, or if new trees grow, the path itself changes over time. At the molecular level, this plasticity involves a complex dance of proteins and neurotransmitters. When a memory is recalled, neurotransmitters like glutamate are released, activating receptors on the receiving neuron. This chain of events triggers a cascade of intracellular signals, leading to the synthesis of new proteins. These proteins can then alter the structure of the synapse itself. For instance, they might increase the number of receptors on the neuron, making it more sensitive to future signals, or even change the physical shape of the dendritic spines, tiny protrusions on neurons where synapses are formed. Imagine these spines as microscopic antennae. Their size and shape can change, making the connection stronger or weaker, more efficient or less so. A childhood memory today, Aris learned, is not just psychologically different from the one held 10 years ago. It is chemically and structurally distinct. The neural pathways that once represented that original experience have been subtly reshaped. The molecular components within those synapses replaced, reassembled, and updated countless times. This isn't just about minor tweaks. It's a profound, continuous remodeling. Over years, the specific proteins involved in maintaining a memory trace, or engram, are constantly being turned over, degraded, and resynthesized. It's like a living structure, where old bricks are continuously replaced with new ones, yet the overall blueprint remains recognizable, albeit subtly altered. Even the very genes within the neurons can be temporarily activated or deactivated during memory formation and recall, influencing the production of these crucial proteins. This means that the neural substrate of your memory today is literally made of different molecules than it was a decade ago. It's a powerful testament to the dynamic nature of our biology, constantly renewing itself. Aris sat late one evening, the glow from her microscope illuminating the meticulous notes she had taken. The implications settled over her like a cool, undeniable truth. Her own cherished childhood memory, the vivid recollection of discovering the fossilized ammonite by the creek, was not the same memory it had been when she was 8 years old. It wasn't even the same memory she had held last year, or even last week. Each time she had revisited that moment in her mind, each time she had told the story, her brain had subtly, unconsciously, rewritten parts of it. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of the smooth, spiraling shell, the cool mud on her hands, the specific angle of the sunlight filtering through the oak leaves. It felt so real, so perfectly preserved. But now, armed with this new understanding, a faint unease began to creep in. Had the oak leaves always been quite that shade of green? Was the ammonite really so perfectly symmetrical? She couldn't be sure. The emotional resonance remained, the core narrative intact, but the details, the sensory richness she had always trusted, now felt like a beautifully rendered illusion. Could the very structure of our brain pathways be shifting with each recollection, weaving a new tapestry of our past? This realization forced Iris to confront a profound implication. If her memories were not static records, then her sense of a stable, consistent self was also built on shifting sands. We often define ourselves by our past experiences, our personal narrative. I am who I am because of what I've done, what I've seen, what I've remembered, we tell ourselves. But if the very essence of those memories is constantly evolving, then who is the I that remembers? Is it possible that the you of today is not simply an accumulation of past selves, but a continuous, active reconstruction? Much like your memories, the brain, Iris reflected, doesn't just store new information in isolation, it integrates it. When you learn something new, especially something that relates to an existing memory, your brain doesn't create a separate, pristine file. Instead, it weaves the new information into the existing neural network. Imagine learning a new fact about the geological era in which ammonites lived. When Iris recalled her fossil memory, that new geological knowledge would subtly influence her recollection. Perhaps she would unconsciously emphasize certain details or reinterpret others in light of her updated understanding. The memory isn't just recalled, it's updated with the current context, the present state of her knowledge, and even her current emotional disposition. This integration is a powerful adaptive mechanism. It allows us to continuously update our understanding of the world and ourselves. We don't live in a static past. We live in a dynamic present, constantly learning and evolving. Our memories, by being fluid, allow us to adapt to new information and integrate it into our personal narrative. If memories were truly immutable, we might struggle to reconcile new experiences with old ones, leading to a fragmented sense of self. Instead, this continuous process of chemical and structural transformation allows for a coherent, albeit evolving, personal story. Iris remembered Professor Petrova explaining this adaptive function. Our memories are not meant to be perfect archives, Iris, Lena had said, her voice calm and reassuring. They are tools for survival, for navigating the present and predicting the future. And to do that effectively, they must be flexible. This flexibility, Iris now understood, was ingrained at the deepest neurobiological level. The constant turnover of proteins, the subtle rewiring of synapses, the integration of new knowledge. All these mechanisms ensured that our memories remained relevant and useful, even at the cost of perfect fidelity. This understanding was both liberating and disorienting. The feeling of certainty she had once placed in her own recollections, especially the foundational ones, had evaporated. Yet, in its place, a new appreciation for the brain's incredible plasticity began to emerge. It wasn't about a flaw in the system, but a feature. Our memories are not static. They are alive, growing and changing with us. This continuous transformation, Iris realized, meant that the self was not a fixed entity rooted in an unchanging past, but a dynamic, evolving narrative, constantly being rewritten and reinterpreted in the light of new experiences. If our memories are not static, what does that mean for our sense of self? Are we truly the sum of our past experiences, or something more fluid, a continuous unfolding story? The realization that her own memories were not immutable recordings, but active constructions, chemically and structurally different from their original formation, was a watershed moment for Iris. It wasn't just a scientific concept. It was a deeply personal truth that reshaped her understanding of her own identity. The solid ground of her past had become a flowing river, beautiful and ever-present, but never the same twice. This profound shift in perspective would inevitably influence her ongoing research and her approach to the very nature of human consciousness. Imagine a quiet evening, perhaps with the soft glow of a reading lamp, as the world outside settles into slumber. You might be drifting, your thoughts gentle. Yet even in this peaceful state, your mind is perpetually active, weaving the fabric of your experience. What if the very threads of that fabric, your memories, are not fixed, immutable strands, but rather shimmering, dynamic filaments, constantly being respun and re-dyed with every touch? What if the personal journey of understanding memory's fluid nature, which began with a neuroscientist's quiet doubt, now expands to encompass the vast tapestry of human society itself? Dr. Aris Thorne had felt the ground shift beneath her own sense of self, realizing her cherished childhood fossil discovery was not a pristine recording, but a narrative continuously edited by her evolving brain. Yet, this profound personal revelation was merely the first ripple in a much larger pond. The implications of memory's inherent malleability, she soon understood, reached far beyond individual recollection, echoing through the grand narratives we tell ourselves as a species, influencing the very structures of justice, and even shaping the delicate art of healing. How could humanity build stable foundations on such shifting sands? She spent hours in her office, the hum of the ventilation system a steady companion, poring over research papers. Her desk became a cluttered landscape of open journals and half-empty coffee mugs, each document a new piece in a puzzle that was both exhilarating and unsettling. If individual memories were so susceptible to change, what did this mean for the collective stories we call history? History, after all, is largely built upon the memories of individuals, passed down, recorded, and interpreted. Aris began to see historical accounts not as definitive pronouncements, but as dynamic reconstructions, shaped and reshaped by generations. Consider how a significant event, like a national founding or a major conflict, is remembered. Initially, it might be the vivid, raw experiences of those who lived through it. But as decades turn into centuries, those direct memories fade. What remains are the stories told, retold, and written down, each iteration subtly influenced by the prevailing social values, political climate, or even the emotional needs of the present. A hero in one era might become a controversial figure in another, not because the facts of their actions changed, but because the lens through which society viewed those actions had shifted. The details of battles, the motivations of leaders, the very essence of a cultural turning point can morph, not through malicious intent, but through the natural reconstructive process of collective memory. Does this mean our understanding of the past is fundamentally unreliable? Or does it mean our history is a living, breathing entity, perpetually re-evaluated and recontextualized? The weight of this insight pressed on Aris. The past, she realized, was not a fixed, unchangeable landscape, but rather a continuously redrawn map, reflecting the concerns and perspectives of the cartographers in each present moment. This wasn't about deliberate deception, but about the inherent nature of how minds, individual and collective, process and retain information. The very act of remembering, whether by a single person or an entire culture, was an act of creation, not mere retrieval. From the broad sweep of history, Aris's thoughts narrowed to the stark realities of the legal system. Here, the fragility of memory took on an immediate, often devastating significance. She recalled the case of Elias Vance, The patient whose vivid but false memories had so clearly illustrated the power of suggestion and emotion. Elias's experience was not an anomaly. It was a microcosm of a much wider phenomenon that has profoundly challenged the bedrock of justice: eyewitness testimony. Imagine a courtroom, hushed and expectant, as a witness takes the stand, their voice trembling yet confident as they recount a crime. Their memory of the event feels utterly real to them, filled with sensory details, the glint of metal, the smell of fear, the precise words spoken. Yet, as Aris had learned, every single one of those details is susceptible to distortion. The stress of the event itself, the questions asked by police during an investigation, the subtle cues from media reports, even the passage of time, all can act as subtle architects, rebuilding the memory in ways that deviate from the original experience. An innocent bystander might genuinely remember seeing a particular facial feature or article of clothing that was never present, simply because a leading question subtly planted that seed. The consequences are stark. Wrongful convictions, often overturned years later by DNA evidence, frequently highlight the catastrophic impact of mistaken eyewitness identification. The individuals who testified were not lying. They were sincerely recounting what their reconstructive memory told them had happened. This understanding has led to significant reforms in legal procedures, such as double-blind lineups, where the administrator doesn't know who the suspect is, and careful instruction to jurors about the limitations of memory. But can we ever truly eradicate the risk when memory itself is so fluid? What does it mean for justice when the very evidence of our eyes and ears can be so easily misled? Aris felt a profound sense of responsibility as she considered these implications. Her research, once focused on strengthening memory, now felt like a double-edged sword. To understand how memory could be altered was to understand a powerful truth, one that demanded immense ethical consideration. This dual nature of memory's malleability, its capacity for both error and adaptation, became even more apparent when Aris explored its role in therapy. Here, the reconstructive quality of memory presented both formidable challenges and astonishing opportunities for healing. On one hand, the vulnerability of memory to suggestion raised serious alarms. The recovered memory controversies of past decades served as a stark warning. In some therapeutic contexts, well-meaning practitioners, through leading questions or hypnotic techniques, inadvertently helped patients construct detailed, vivid memories of traumatic events, such as childhood abuse, that later proved to be false. These instances caused immense personal suffering and legal complications, underscoring the delicate balance required when exploring a patient's past. A therapist, Aris realized, must navigate the landscape of memory with extreme caution, aware that they are not simply unearthing static records, but actively participating in a dynamic, reconstructive process. On the other hand, this very malleability offered a powerful avenue for therapeutic intervention. If memories could be altered during reconsolidation, then perhaps traumatic memories, those that trap individuals in cycles of fear and pain, could be modified in a beneficial way. Imagine a patient suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, haunted by a vivid, terrifying memory of a past event. When they recall that memory, it becomes temporarily unstable, vulnerable to change. This is a crucial window. Therapies are now being developed that aim to introduce new, calming information or emotional context during this reconsolidation phase. For example, a patient might recall a traumatic event in a safe, supportive environment, under the influence of a medication that dampens the emotional response, like a beta blocker. The goal isn't to erase the memory entirely, but to update it, reducing its emotional intensity and allowing it to be restored in a less debilitating form. The original facts remain, but the overwhelming fear or anxiety associated with them can be softened. Does this offer a pathway to genuine healing, or are we simply tinkering with the symptoms rather than addressing the root cause? This concept of therapeutic reconsolidation captivated Iris. It transformed the unsettling fluidity of memory into a potential tool for liberation. It shifted the perspective from memory as a fragile, easily broken record to memory as a living, adaptable system designed for survival and growth. This was a challenging but ultimately hopeful frontier. The scientific community, Iris knew, was buzzing with activity around these very questions. The precise mechanisms of memory modification, the how behind reconsolidation, remained an active area of intense debate and discovery. Scientists were delving into the molecular intricacies of the synapse, the tiny gap between neurons where information is transmitted. They were asking, what specific proteins are involved in strengthening or weakening these connections during memory recall and restorage? How do neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine, often associated with emotion and reward, influence the stability or vulnerability of a memory? Researchers were exploring the boundary conditions of reconsolidation. Are all memories equally susceptible? Is there a point at which a memory becomes so deeply entrenched, so thoroughly consolidated, that it resists modification? Some studies suggest that very old, highly practiced memories might be more resilient, while others argue that almost any memory, when properly reactivated, can enter a state of vulnerability. These debates were not merely academic. They held the key to understanding which memories could be therapeutically targeted and which might require different approaches. The sheer complexity of the brain's memory systems was daunting. It wasn't just about individual synapses. It was about entire networks. The hippocampus, crucial for forming new memories. The amygdala, the seat of emotional memory. The prefrontal cortex, involved in decision-making and context, all interact in intricate ways during memory retrieval and reconsolidation. Understanding these interactions, how they orchestrate the dance of memory, was the focus of countless labs around the world. Iris envisioned her own lab contributing to this grand endeavor, armed with a new perspective. The ethical considerations of manipulating memory, however, were even more profound than the scientific ones. If science could truly offer the means to selectively dampen or even erase traumatic memories, where would the line be drawn? What if someone wanted to erase the memory of a failed relationship, a disappointing career choice, or even a negative personality trait? Who would decide which memories were unwanted enough to be modified? And what would be the long-term consequences of such interventions on an individual's identity, their capacity for learning from mistakes, or their understanding of their own life story? Iris grappled with these philosophical questions. Memory, she realized, was not just about recalling facts. It was about building a personal narrative, a sense of self. To alter that narrative, even with the best intentions, was to touch the very core of what it meant to be human. The power to manipulate memory was a power that demanded unparalleled wisdom and foresight. It was a power that, in the wrong hands or with insufficient understanding, could have dystopian implications. Despite these ethical labyrinths, the practical significance of memory research continued to drive progress. In forensic science, understanding memory's reconstructive nature was leading to better interrogation techniques, designed to minimize suggestion and elicit more reliable information. In education, insights into how memories are formed and reconsolidated offered potential pathways to optimizing learning strategies, making knowledge more durable and accessible. In mental health, the promise of targeted therapies for conditions like PTSD, phobias, and addiction, by addressing the maladaptive memories that fuel them, was immense. Researchers were actively exploring pharmacological interventions using existing drugs like beta blockers to disrupt reconsolidation in animals and human trials. Others were venturing into advanced neurotechnologies, employing optogenetics, using light to control genetically modified neurons, or DREADS, designer receptors activated by designer drugs, to precisely activate or inhibit specific neural circuits involved in memory processes. These cutting-edge techniques promised unprecedented control, but also amplified the ethical imperative to proceed with extreme caution and public dialogue. Aris felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her initial quest to strengthen memory had transformed into a deeper understanding of its dynamic nature, and now into a profound appreciation for its far-reaching implications. The journey of understanding memory was far from over. It was an active, vibrant frontier, constantly pushing the boundaries of what humanity knew about itself. The next steps would involve not just scientific discovery, but careful ethical reflection, ensuring that the incredible power to understand and potentially influence memory was wielded responsibly for the betterment of human experience. So, as you reflect on your own memories, perhaps a cherished moment from childhood or a significant event from yesterday, remember that they are not static recordings. They are living, breathing narratives, constantly being rewoven by your brain, shaped by your emotions, your current context, and even the subtle suggestions of the world around you. This fluidity, while challenging our assumptions about the past, is also a testament to the brain's incredible adaptability, a mechanism for learning, growth, and ultimately for defining who you are in this ever-changing present. The journey into the nature of memory continues, promising to reveal even more about the intricate dance between our past, our present, and our future selves. Have you ever sat quietly, perhaps as twilight deepens, and simply allowed your mind to drift back through the corridors of your past? Perhaps to a warm summer afternoon from childhood, a significant conversation, or a moment of quiet triumph. We often experience these memories with such vividness, such a richness of sensory detail, that they feel utterly real, like perfectly preserved snapshots or recordings playing back in our minds. But what if this deeply comforting perception, this bedrock of our personal history, is itself an illusion? What if the very act of remembering doesn't just retrieve a memory, but subtly, imperceptibly, changes it? This question, once a profound source of unease, ultimately leads to a liberating understanding of who we truly are. Dr. Aris Thorne, initially a staunch believer in the fidelity of memory, had journeyed through a landscape of scientific revelation and personal introspection. The unsettling discrepancies observed in her lab, the quiet wisdom shared by Professor Lena Petrova, and the poignant case of Elias Vance had each been a chisel, carefully reshaping her long-held convictions. Now, a profound tranquility had settled within her, replacing the initial discomfort. She sat in her office as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her desk, the air still carrying the faint scent of old books and freshly brewed coffee. Her gaze drifted across the framed photograph of her fossil discovery, a cherished relic from her own childhood, which had once represented the unassailable truth of her past. It no longer felt like a static monument, but rather a vibrant, living story, constantly recounted and subtly re-edited by the very act of remembering. Memory, Aris now understood, was not a passive recording device, like a video camera or a voice recorder capturing an event precisely as it happened. Instead, it was an active, dynamic, and profoundly creative process. Each time we revisit an experience, our brain doesn't just pull up a file. It reconstructs the event, weaving together fragments of information, filling in gaps with plausible details, and often integrating new knowledge or current emotional states into the narrative. This reconstruction is facilitated by neural engrams, which are not fixed points in the brain, but rather distributed networks of neurons that become active during memory formation and retrieval. These networks are constantly being reshaped through synaptic plasticity, where the connections between neurons strengthen or weaken, and even entirely new connections can form, while old ones fade. The memory of your childhood home, for instance, is not stored in one specific location. Instead, elements like its scent, the sound of your mother's voice, the texture of the living room rug, and the feeling of the sun on your face through a specific window are distributed across various brain regions. When you recall that home, your brain reassembles these disparate pieces, creating a coherent experience that feels whole and real. This understanding, initially disorienting, had gradually morphed into a deep sense of liberation for Aris. To accept that memory is not a perfect record is to embrace the inherent flexibility of the human mind, a flexibility crucial for survival and adaptation. Imagine a species whose memories were utterly immutable, incapable of being updated or recontextualized. Such a species would struggle to learn from mistakes, to adapt to changing environments, or to integrate new information that contradicted past experiences. Our dynamic memory system, by contrast, allows us to constantly refine our understanding of the world and our place within it. It enables us to update our internal models, incorporating new lessons and perspectives, ensuring that our past serves not as a rigid anchor, but as a flexible foundation from which we can continually grow. This profound shift in perspective also reshaped Aris's understanding of identity. For so long, she had believed that her sense of self was anchored in a collection of fixed, verifiable memories. The fossil, the conference, the specific details of a childhood summer. These were the immutable facts that defined her. But if these memories were not fixed, if they were constantly evolving narratives, what did that mean for her identity? The answer, she realized, was not that her identity was diminished, but that it was more vibrant, more alive than she had ever imagined. One's identity, she now understood, is not a static photograph, but an ongoing, continuously evolving story, a narrative that we actively construct and reconstruct throughout our lives. Think about your own life. How many times have you looked back at an event from years ago and seen it in a completely new light? Perhaps a challenging period from youth that once felt like a failure now appears as a crucial growth experience. Or a difficult relationship, once viewed with bitterness, is now understood with a deeper sense of empathy and nuance. These aren't just shifts in perspective. They are instances where your brain has literally re-edited the memory, integrating new information, new emotional understanding, and new self-knowledge into the very fabric of that past event. The neural pathways associated with that memory have undergone chemical and structural changes, reflecting your updated understanding. Your childhood memory today is not chemically or structurally identical to the one you held 10 years ago. It has been integrated, recontextualized, and subtly rewritten by every subsequent experience, by every new piece of information you've acquired, by every shift in your emotional landscape. This realization wasn't disorienting, it was empowering. It meant that our past is not a prison of unchangeable facts, but a rich, pliable resource from which we continuously build our present and future selves. It meant that we are not merely products of our past, but active co-creators of our own ongoing story. This fluidity, this capacity for reimagining, is a testament to the brain's remarkable ability to learn, adapt, and heal. With this newfound clarity, Aris's thoughts naturally turn to the future, to the immense possibilities that lay ahead for scientific research, particularly in the realm of therapeutic applications. If memories are indeed malleable, susceptible to modification during reconsolidation, then perhaps this very vulnerability could be harnessed for healing. Imagine the potential for alleviating the crippling burden of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Traumatic memories, often characterized by their vivid, intrusive, and emotionally charged nature, are notoriously resistant to conventional therapies. However, if these memories could be subtly modified during their unstable reconsolidation phase, perhaps their emotional impact could be dampened, their vividness reduced, or their negative associations rewired. Current research is already exploring these avenues. Scientists are investigating pharmacological agents that can selectively interfere with the reconsolidation of fear memories, or behavioral interventions that introduce new, positive information during recall, effectively updating the old distressing memory. Consider a veteran haunted by the memory of a combat incident. If, under controlled therapeutic conditions, that memory is gently brought to consciousness, it enters a transient state of instability. During this window, targeted interventions, perhaps a carefully chosen medication, or the deliberate introduction of a calming, safe context, could alter the way the memory is restored, reducing the intensity of its fear response without erasing the factual content of the event. The memory would still exist, but its power to overwhelm and paralyze would be significantly diminished. This isn't about erasing history, it's about rewriting its emotional script. Beyond trauma, the implications extend to a spectrum of psychological conditions. Phobias, for instance, are essentially learned fear memories. If the memory of encountering a spider, which triggers an intense fear response, could be reconsolidated with a new, neutral, or even positive association, the phobia could potentially be attenuated. Similarly, in addiction recovery, the powerful reward memories associated with substance use could be targeted, gradually weakening their hold. This avenue of research is delicate and fraught with ethical considerations, as Aris had explored in depth. The precise mechanisms of memory modification, the long-term effects, and the potential for unintended alterations to a person's identity or sense of self must be meticulously studied and understood. Yet, the promise of offering profound relief to millions of individuals suffering from debilitating memory-related disorders is a powerful motivator for continued exploration. The active frontiers of memory research are vibrant and multidisciplinary. Neuroscientists are employing advanced techniques like optogenetics, which uses light to control the activity of specific neurons, and sophisticated computational modeling to map the intricate neural circuits involved in memory formation and reconsolidation. They are peering into the very symphony of the brain, identifying the specific molecular and cellular changes that underpin a memory's transformation. What proteins are synthesized or degraded? Which genes are activated? How do different brain regions, such as the hippocampus, crucial for forming new explicit memories, and the amygdala, central to emotional processing, interact during recall and reconsolidation? These are the questions that continue to drive scientific inquiry, pushing the boundaries of our understanding of the human mind. As Iris looked out her window, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, she felt a profound sense of awe. The human mind, with its capacity for memory, was not a simple recorder of objective truth, but a magnificent storyteller, an artist continually sketching and refining the narrative of our lives. This perspective offered a new lens through which to view not just herself, but all of humanity. Our shared history, our cultural narratives, our personal anecdotes, all are dynamic, living entities, constantly being retold, reinterpreted, and reshaped by each generation, by each individual. This fluidity, far from undermining our sense of reality, enriches it, allowing for growth, empathy, and the continuous evolution of understanding. So the next time you recall a cherished memory, pause for a moment. Instead of seeing it as a fixed recording, consider it a masterful reconstruction, a story beautifully retold by your own magnificent brain. Recognize that this act of remembering is not just a glimpse into the past, but an active moment of creation, shaping who you are right now. Your identity is not defined by static recollections, but by the continuous, evolving narrative you construct. It is a testament to our adaptability, our capacity for learning, and our unending journey of becoming. The nature of memory, it turns out, is not a limitation, but a profound